I want to start this story the way I wish someone had started one for me, 15 years ago, when I was 31 and sitting on the edge of our bed with a handful of my own blouses in my hands and a husband on the other side of the bedroom door asking me, very quietly, what I was going to do. My name is Mara, and I have been married for 2 decades to a person who used to be called David, but who has been called Nora for the last 6 years. I do not tell this story for shock value. I tell it because the night I sat holding those blouses, I would have given almost anything to hear another woman say out loud what she had learned, what she had got wrong, what she had got right, and how she had lived through it. There is a way of telling this kind of story that turns a human journey into a kind of circus, and there is another way that keeps it as what it actually is, which is 2 people trying to love each other well enough that neither of them has to disappear. This is the second kind. If you are here because you are the spouse, or the parent, or the sibling, or the friend of someone whose gender does not fit the story you were told, let me say the most important thing first. You do not have to understand everything today. You do not have to feel generous today. You do not have to be brave today. You only have to be willing to stay in the room, even when the room is uncomfortable, long enough to hear what is actually being said. Almost every harm I have seen done, in other families and in my own worst moments, came from someone leaving the room too early. I am going to walk you through 6 phases, but I am not going to label them for you. The whole thing will flow as one telling because that is how life actually moves. There is no neat chapter break between the day you first suspect something and the day you fly to another city to help your wife pick out her first proper suit. The ground shifts underneath you slowly. Then you realize that you are standing somewhere you could not have imagined, and you try to figure out how you got there. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest where the rules about gender were not spoken out loud because they did not need to be. Boys wore jeans and flannel. Girls wore dresses on Sundays and played softball in the summers. My father mowed the lawn on Saturdays. My mother took care of us and the house during the week, and nobody ever asked either of them whether they had chosen that life or whether it had simply been the only one offered to them. I learned very early that the right thing to do was to fit pleasantly into the slot that had been prepared for you. I was good at slots. I was a pleasant daughter. I was a courteous waitress at the diner where I worked through college. I smiled the right amount, kept my hair the right length, and never once understood that the comfort I felt in that slot was partly luck and partly survival. I met David, who is now Nora, when I was 22 and he was 24. He was 2 years into a job as an electrical apprentice, and he had the kind of calm that I had not been around much in my own family. He listened more than he spoke. He asked me what I thought about things instead of telling me what I should think about them. He laughed at my jokes, including the ones that were not very good. On our second date, he brought me a paperback from a used bookshop because he had seen me looking at the same one through the window the week before. That kind of attention was so unfamiliar to me that I mistook it for some kind of magic, and I fell in love with it so completely that I did not stop to ask myself whether the man who was paying all that attention was paying it to me, or to the version of himself that he was building in order to be the kind of man that women like me believed they wanted. We got engaged in 1998. We got married a year later. We bought a small house 2 years after that, with a porch that needed painting and a backyard where we eventually planted a maple tree that is taller than the roof now. We talked about having children the way you talk about weather. Someday. Eventually. When the time is right. The maple tree and the absence of children are the things I think about when I try to remember what the early years felt like. We were happy enough. We were respectful enough. We were tired enough. I worked at a marketing firm that took more of me than I had realized at the time, and David worked his way up from apprentice to licensed electrician to running a small crew of his own. We had friends, mostly couples, who we saw on weekends and for holidays. We had parents who were proud of us in the uncomplicated way that small-town parents are proud of children who have steady jobs and come home at the right time. For the first 6 years of our marriage, nothing in our house made me uneasy. The flag I did not see was a small one, the kind that just looks like a fold in the fabric. David liked taking long showers. He liked wearing my sweaters around the house on Sundays when we were both just puttering. He said he liked how soft they were. He said he liked the way the sleeves fell over his hands. I thought that was sweet. He asked me once, very lightly, what I would think if a man at his work wore a skirt in summer because the heat was unbearable. I said I would think he was eccentric. David laughed and said he would probably also think he was eccentric, but that he hoped someone would be kind to the man, because the heat really was unbearable. I did not register the care in that answer. I registered the eccentricity. I put it down to David being a fair-minded person, which he was, and I moved on. Looking back, the signs I missed were not dramatic. They were not secrets being kept in locked boxes. They were small, ordinary moments that I interpreted through the only lens I had, which was the lens of a woman who had been told her whole life that men and women are simply two different kinds of people, and that any man who steps too close to the women's side is either a joke or a pervert. That is the lens the world hands you. You do not choose it. You absorb it. And because you absorb it, you walk past the most important signals of your own life, the same way a person who has been colorblind since birth walks past a stop sign without ever knowing what they have missed. Around year 7, the signals got loud enough that I could not pretend not to notice. I came home early from work one afternoon because a meeting had been canceled. The house was quiet. The shower was not running. There was no car in the driveway, so I assumed David was out on a job. I put my bag down on the kitchen counter, and that is when I saw, in a small mirror that hangs by the front door, that my winter coat was missing from its hook. I do not know why this particular detail landed the way it did. I can only tell you that it did. I stood in the hallway and felt something cold run through me that was not the draft from the front door. I went upstairs. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made. The window was open to let in the spring air. I did not find my coat. What I found was a small box on the top shelf of our closet, behind a stack of sweaters I had not worn in years. The box was not locked. It was a shoebox, the kind you save, because you think you might need it later. Inside it, folded very carefully, were 3 items. A pair of women's jeans in a size I could have worn myself. A plain white blouse with the tags still on. And a single piece of paper handwritten that said, in a familiar handwriting, "Please do not hate me. I love you. I do not know what is happening to me." I sat on the bed with the box in my lap for a long time. I did not cry, which I am now embarrassed by. I think I did not cry because crying felt like a decision, and I was not ready to make any decisions yet. I put the blouse back in the box. I put the paper back in the box. I put the box back on the shelf. I closed the closet door, hung my coat on its hook when I went back downstairs, and I drove to the office, where I sat at my desk for 3 hours and accomplished almost nothing, because the whole time I was trying very hard not to ask myself a question that I was not sure I wanted the answer to. What I want to say about that evening, and about the months that followed, is that the right response did not come from instinct. The wrong response came from instinct. Instinct told me that I had been betrayed. Instinct told me that the man I had married was a stranger. Instinct told me that this was about me, that he had done this to me, that I was a fool for not having seen it. Instinct was loud. Instinct was almost impossible to argue with. And instinct was wrong about nearly everything. The first thing I did right, without knowing that I was doing it right, was that I did not confront him. I did not put the box on the kitchen table when he came home. I did not throw the blouse at him. I did not lock him out of the bedroom. I had been raised, like many of us, to believe that the right thing to do with a secret is to expose it. The truth is that the right thing to do with a secret is sometimes just to give the other person a chance to come to it on their own. I know this sounds like advice, and I want to be careful with advice because I do not know your life. I am only telling you what I did, and what I think was useful about it, and what was not. A week later, on a Saturday morning when neither of us had anywhere to be, David came down to the kitchen and sat across from me and said that he had something to tell me. He was shaking. I could see the mug in his hand trembling. He said he had been struggling with something for most of his life. He said he had tried very hard for a long time to make the struggle go away. He said that this year it had got louder. He said that he had bought the blouse in March because he wanted to see how it felt, and that it had felt like the first quiet moment he had had in a year. He did not use the word transgender. He did not use the word dysphoria. He barely used the word woman. He just kept saying, "I do not know what is happening to me, and I am sorry, and I love you." I remember that I said almost nothing. I sat at the kitchen table, and I held the mug that he had handed me, even though I did not want it, because taking it gave me something to do with my hands. I remember that my first coherent thought was not about the marriage, although it got there quickly enough. My first coherent thought was, He has been suffering alone in our house for years. That thought did not come from any wisdom I had learned. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere I did not know I had. I am grateful for it every day because if that thought had not arrived when it did, I would have started talking, and if I had started talking, I would have said the wrong things, and the wrong things that you say in those first minutes can do damage that takes years to undo. I told him that I was glad he had told me. I told him that I did not know what this meant. I told him that I loved him, which was true. I told him that I needed some time. I did not say anything else that morning. He went to do a job in a nearby town. I sat at the kitchen table, and I watched the maple tree through the window for a long time, and then I called my sister, who is the most level-headed person I know, and I told her as much as I could, and she said almost nothing, and that almost nothing was the best thing she could have done. What followed was not a single dramatic conversation. It was a season. There were mornings when I woke up and the bed felt as if it belonged to two strangers. There were evenings when I tried to be the patient, generous wife, and the patience felt so fake that I wanted to scream. There were nights when we lay in the dark and he cried quietly into his pillow, and nights when I cried quietly into mine, and one night when we both laughed at some stupid joke on the television, and the laughter felt like the most human thing in the world. The hardest part, for me, was not the strange new information. The hardest part was the reorganization I had to do of my own life. I had built my identity, in part, around being the wife of a man. I had imagined my 50s, my 60s, my 70s in a particular shape. I had imagined the porch, the grandchildren, the anniversary cards. None of those futures had been dishonest. They had simply assumed a shape that might not be the right one for the person I was married to. Letting go of an imagined future is not the same as losing someone. It is closer to releasing a sketch you drew of a house that was never built. I am telling you this because I think it is important that I do not pretend to have been the perfect spouse through the early part of the story. I was not. There were moments when I packed a bag in my mind and walked out the door and drove to my sister's place and sat on her couch and cried, and then drove back home because I could not make the drive stick in my body. There were moments when I said things that were not generous, and I said them in the tone of voice that you use when you want the other person to feel the sharpness of their behavior. I said at one point that he had wasted my 20s. I said at another point that he had tricked me. I said late one night after too much wine that I could never bring him to my parents' house again because my father would not understand, and that if my father could not understand it, then my parents would lose a son-in-law, and that was his fault, not theirs. I want you to hear those sentences the way I heard them when he repeated them back to me, very gently, 3 weeks into couples therapy. I want you to hear them as the sound of a person trying to protect herself. I want you to hear them as the sound of a person who is not yet able to separate her own panic from her spouse's pain. And I want you to hear them as the kind of thing that almost any human being says in a season like this, regardless of how intelligent they are, regardless of how good their intentions are, regardless of how educated or liberal or loving they thought they were an hour before the world gave them a reason to test it. If you are the spouse in this story, please do not hear me as forgiving those sentences. I am not forgiving them. I am simply saying that they are common, and that being common does not make them harmless, and that the difference between a relationship that survives the season and a relationship that does not is often just whether there is someone wise enough to help both of you recognize the sentences for what they are before the sentences have done the harm they were designed, by your own hidden part, to do. We started couples therapy 5 weeks after the conversation in the kitchen. I found a therapist through a referral from my sister, who had used her for something else and trusted her. The therapist was a woman in her 50s named Lillian. She had a small office above a bakery. She did not have a magic wand. She did not have a script. What she had was the patience to sit with two people who were circling each other like frightened cats, and the good sense to refuse to let either of us leave early. The first 4 sessions were almost unbearable. Lillian would ask a simple question, like, "What did you eat for breakfast this morning?" And David and I would look at each other as if we had forgotten how the simplest things worked. Lillian did not try to jump straight into the hardest topics. She started with breakfast, with errands, with weekend plans, with small stories about our parents and our siblings. She was rebuilding the room we sat in. She was trying to make it safe enough that the bigger things could be said without breaking the room. Around session 5, Lillian said something to me that I still think about once a week. She said that I had every right to be frightened, and that being frightened was not the same as being cruel, but that if I let the frightened part of me lead every conversation, I would eventually become cruel, and that the couples she had seen break apart were nearly always the couples in which the frightened part of one person had been in charge for too long. She said that I had a wiser part of me, and that the work of therapy was going to be to help me listen to that wiser part more often than to the frightened part. She said this to me without judgment, without pity, and without any of the soft patting on the hand that I had not realized I was hoping someone would give me. By the time I got to my car after that session, I had decided that I did not want to be the person who let fear run the family. Around session 7, David started to use the word trans. He had looked up some things online. He had read about gender dysphoria. He had watched a few videos, including some by older trans women who described the feeling of finally being seen as themselves as the first time they had been able to breathe properly in their lives. He told me that he identified with what those women described. He told me that he was not sure how he would live with it. He told me that he did not know what it would mean for his work, for his body, for his name, for me. He told me that he was afraid of all of it, and that he was also, for the first time, slightly less afraid of himself. I want to be honest about what I felt that day. Part of me was relieved because finally there was a word, and a word can be carried. Part of me was sad because the word opened a door that I could not close behind me. Part of me was angry because he had found relief in a community that I had not yet found relief in. Part of me was jealous, in a way that surprised me, because the more clearly he saw himself, the less clearly I could see our life together. Over the next several months, I had to accept that my relief, my sadness, my anger, and my jealousy would live inside me at the same time, and that none of them was going to leave just because I would have preferred it to be simpler. One of the things that kept us afloat, surprisingly, was a book. Lillian suggested it. It was a memoir by a partner of a trans woman, written in plain language, not academic, not political, not a manifesto. The writer had gone through much of what I was going through. She had made some of the mistakes I was making. She had learned some of the gentleness I was trying to learn. She did not pretend the marriage had come out unchanged. She did not pretend the marriage had been destroyed either. She wrote in a way that respected both realities, and her respect made it possible for me to look at my own life without the constant urge to flatten it into either a tragedy or a triumph. I started keeping a journal around that time. I had not kept a journal since I was a teenager. I bought a cheap one at the supermarket. I wrote for 10 minutes most evenings, sometimes a page, sometimes 3 lines. What I wrote was not for anyone. It was not for David. It was not for the therapist. It was for the part of me that was smaller and younger and more frightened than the part that sat in Lillian's office and tried to be wise. That smaller part needed somewhere to put her fear, and the journal was where I let her do it. If you are the partner in a story like this, I cannot say strongly enough that you need somewhere to put your fear. It does not have to be a journal. It can be a friend, a therapist, a long drive, a run, a church that lets you sit in the back and say nothing. It has to be somewhere that you do not have to be wise. Somewhere that you can be a mess for 10 minutes. The next big shift came when David started to be Nora at home. Not all the time. Not even most of the time. An hour in the evening, when I was in the kitchen, she would put on the blouse from the box, the same blouse, and she would sit at the dining table and read. Sometimes we would talk. Sometimes we would not. We were figuring out, very slowly, what it felt like to be in the same room with this new person. I will not lie to you. It was strange. It was strange in a way that is hard to describe in language that does not sound either dismissive or sensational. There is a version of the story in which the moment your spouse comes out of the bedroom in different clothes should be a celebration, and there's a version in which it should be a tragedy, and neither of those versions is true in the way you imagine them to be when you are in the middle of it. The truth is closer to this. It was just a Tuesday. It was just a person in a blouse at a table reading a book. It was a Tuesday, and yet the Tuesday was different from every other Tuesday we had known. I made mistakes during those Tuesday evenings. I tried too hard in the early ones to be encouraging. I complimented her blouse. I told her she looked nice. I used the new name too quickly, and then pulled back too quickly. I smiled when I was not smiling inside. I did all of the things that a person does when they are trying to perform the right response, rather than actually have one. I did not know at the time that performing the right response was almost worse than having the wrong one, because at least with the wrong one you are honest. Honesty, even messy honesty, can be cleaned up. Performance is hard to clean up because the other person does not know it is happening, and so they cannot help you stop. Lillian helped me see this about myself, gently, over several sessions. She did not accuse me. She did not catch me. She simply asked, in the soft voice she used when she was about to say something important, whether I had noticed that I had started saying the new name as if it were a sentence I had learned in a foreign language, with perfect grammar and no warmth. She asked me whether I had noticed that when I said, "You look nice," my eyes went to the blouse and not to her face. She asked me whether I had noticed that I had lost the ability to be in the room with my own wife without being in the room with a small committee of advisors observing and judging whether I was being good enough. I had not noticed any of those things. Once she pointed them out, I could not unnotice them, and I sat with the discomfort of that for at least a month before I was able to start changing. There is no amount of self-improvement talk that can make this part of the story feel less lonely. You are lonely in your own marriage for a stretch of time that has no clear end. You are lonely even when the other person is in the next room just thinking. You are lonely because there is no script. There is no Hallmark card for, "I am glad you are figuring yourself out, and I am also grieving the future we had planned." There is no template for, "I love you, and I am terrified of what this will do to my parents, to my friends, to my own sense of who I am." You are lonely in a way that even the people closest to you cannot fully reach, because their love for you is built on a story that no longer holds, and they're also lonely, in their own way, in their own rooms. If you are reading this, and you are inside that loneliness right now, please hear me when I say that the loneliness is not the end of the relationship. The loneliness is the gap between the old story and the new one. The gap feels longer than it is. The gap feels wider than it is. But it has edges, and on the other side of the gap there is a different kind of togetherness, one that is less automatic and more deliberate, and that deliberateness, once you are used to it, turns out to be more intimate than the automatic kind ever was. We hit a wall in our second year of therapy. The wall was not a fight. The wall was a quiet period in which we both stopped saying new things to each other. We had been circling the same handful of topics for months. We had been practicing the same small kindnesses and the same small meannesses. Lillian noticed it before either of us did. She suggested that we take a 6-week break from couples therapy and each do some individual work. She suggested that we date again. Not in a dramatic way. Not a vacation. Not a second honeymoon. Just ordinary dates, the kind we had been too tired to plan in our 30s and 40s. Coffee on a Saturday morning. Dinner at the local diner at 6 on a Wednesday. A walk around the block after work. She said that we needed to remember why we had liked each other in the first place before we tried to decide what to do about the rest. We did this. We started small. We put our phones in a drawer at dinner. We asked each other questions that we already knew the answers to, just to hear the answers again. We laughed at things we had stopped laughing at. Nora, who had started taking small doses of estrogen by then, and whose face had begun to soften in ways I had never seen before, sat across from me at the diner and ate a piece of pie and complained about the crust, and I watched her do it with a feeling that I can only describe as a kind of recognition. Not recognition of Nora, in particular. Recognition of the feeling of sitting across from someone you have known for many years and seeing, suddenly, that they still surprise you. I had thought I had lost that feeling. I had thought the transition had taken it from me. It had not taken it. It had moved it. It had put it in a different drawer. When I opened the drawer, the feeling was still there. Around that time, Nora's mother came to visit. This is its own story, and I will not pretend it was easy. Her mother is a kind woman who loved her son deeply. She had not yet met her daughter. We had talked for months about how to make this visit happen. We had role-played it with Lillian. We had agreed on what Nora would wear. We had agreed on what pronouns we would use. We had agreed that I would be in the kitchen for most of the first afternoon so that the two of them could be alone. None of our preparations made the first afternoon easy. Nora's mother came in the front door smiling her usual smile, saw her child, and stopped walking in the doorway for a full 10 seconds. I stood in the kitchen with a wet towel in my hand and listened to the silence and tried very hard not to make it shorter. Nora walked over to her mother and took her arm and led her into the living room. I could hear the two of them talking very softly. I could hear her mother crying, intermittently, in the way that older women cry, like weather. I could hear Nora answering, with a new voice she had been practicing, in a steady tone, not defensive, not apologetic, just steady. I stayed in the kitchen for an hour. When I came into the living room, her mother was holding Nora's hand and looking at our wedding photograph on the mantel. Her mother said, mostly to herself, that David had been a handsome boy. Nora said gently that she was still handsome. Her mother laughed in the watery way that people laugh when they have been crying. I sat in the chair by the window and felt that I was watching something I would remember for the rest of my life. Nora's mother came back 3 more times that year. The second visit was easier. The third visit was almost ordinary. By the 4th visit, she was bringing Nora blouses of her own, picked out from the racks at the thrift store in her hometown. She was also calling her by the new name, although she slipped sometimes, in her own way, when she was tired or distracted. We never corrected her. We just waited, and she usually caught herself. I learned something from her in those months, which is that parents do not need to be perfect in order to grow. They just need to be willing to keep showing up. My own parents were a different story, and I want to be honest about that because honesty is the only currency that matters in this kind of telling. My father did not come around. I would like to say that he did because it would make a better story, but a better story was not what I agreed to give you. My father loved his son-in-law. He had loved David the way that fathers-in-law of his generation loved sons-in-law, which is to say that he had welcomed him into the family and had taken him fishing a few times and had bragged about him to his friends at the VFW hall. He could not welcome Nora into that same role. He told me on the phone late at night, 3 years into the story, that he was sorry, that he still loved me, but that he could not love her. I do not know if he ever changed his mind. He passed away 4 years ago, and I do not know, to this day, whether he changed his mind in the years in between. I tell you that not to hurt you with it and not to make you feel sorry for me. I tell you because it is part of the truth of our lives, and because the truth of our lives includes grief that is not resolved, and because I want you to know that even in a story like this one, even with a mostly good outcome, there are going to be pockets of the life that simply will not become what you wanted them to become. You have to make room for those pockets, and the making of room for them is its own grief, and the grief does not have to defeat you. You just have to keep walking with it. After 2.5 years of couples therapy, for years of on and off individual therapy for both of us, a round of family sessions, and a great deal of quiet work that did not look like anything from the outside, Nora legally changed her name and updated her identification. We had some practical things to deal with. Her driver's license, her professional license as an electrician, her health insurance. Each of these was its own small battle, with a bureaucratic system that had not yet caught up with the way people actually live. She went to some of those appointments alone. I went to some with her. We discovered that the people behind the counters were usually kind, once you gave them a chance to be kind, and that the few who were not kind could be politely ended, the way a phone call is politely ended, with thank you and goodbye. She did not have bottom surgery during the years I am telling you about, and she may, or may not in the years to come. That is her decision and hers alone, and the right of any trans person to make their own decisions about their own body is not something that I, as her spouse, get to vote on. There was a brief period very early in our story when I was reading things online and thought I had opinions about what she should or should not do with her body, and I am grateful that I came to my senses before I ever said those opinions out loud to her in any serious way. The body is hers. It has always been hers. My job, as her partner, was to make sure that I was not making her body's business into mine. This is a place where I want to say something to the other spouses, the ones who are very early in the story. There will come a moment, probably more than once, in which you feel like you have the right to have an opinion about some medical decision. You may even feel like you have the responsibility to have an opinion about it, because you are married to this person and you love them, and the marriage is being affected. I want to tell you, gently, that the marriage is being affected in almost no way by most of the medical decisions you are worried about. The marriage is being affected by the way you talk to each other across the kitchen table. The marriage is being affected by the way you hold each other's hand on a Saturday afternoon. The marriage is being affected by whether you can sit in the same room and be afraid together without one of you turning the fear into a weapon. The medical decisions belong to your spouse. The relational decisions belong to both of you. There were weeks in those middle years when our relationship was genuinely tired. We had fewer good days than bad days. Some weeks we had no good days at all. We had an appointment with Lillian canceled twice because one of us was too angry to be in the same room as the other. We had a Christmas in which we did not give each other gifts because neither of us could figure out what a gift meant anymore. We had a tax season in which Nora, who had just updated her name on our joint filing, cried in the car after dropping the forms at the post office because the world had asked for paperwork that confirmed her in a way she had not previously been confirmed, and because confirming things on paper is not the same as confirming them in the heart, and because she had not yet had many confirmations in the heart from me. I tell you those weeks because I think it is important that you do not imagine that our marriage is one of those stories where everything got better quickly because we were brave enough to keep going. Our marriage stayed hard for a long time after Nora came out. The hardness changed shape, but it did not leave. Some seasons it looked like furniture being bought, sometimes not. Some seasons it looked like me being sick with worry about my father, some seasons it looked like Nora being sick with worry about her career. The work did not end. The work eventually became part of the rhythm, and the rhythm itself became something we could rely on. In our 4th year of telling the story, Nora and I sat down at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning and made a list of the things that still frightened us. The list, which I still keep in the back of my journal, had 7 items on it. My father, Nora's job, money, the neighbors, my own loneliness, Nora's loneliness, the fear that the other one of us would change our mind. We sat with the list for an hour. We did not try to solve anything. We just looked at it and let it look back at us. After the hour, Nora said that she thought we should keep going. I said that I thought we should keep going. We did not say, in those words, that we loved each other. We said, by saying that we should keep going, something that I came to understand over the next several years of our life together was actually a much deeper form of love than the kind we had practiced before. It was love as a verb, not love as a noun. It was the kind of love that has its feet on the ground. The integration, which is what I'm going to start calling the final part of this telling, did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as a long, slow, unglamorous accumulation of small adjustments, the way a riverbed changes over decades. We figured out new household routines. Nora's name went on the mailbox. We joked about it because we had a friend who worked at the post office and who had been the one to physically carry the new nameplate across the street. I changed the names I used in casual conversation. I stopped saying my husband when I was introducing the situation to new acquaintances, and I started saying my wife. That was harder than it sounds. Habit is a kind of home, and you have to leave habit before you can build a new home, and leaving home, even when it is the right thing to do, is uncomfortable. Our friends split into 3 rough groups. One group was immediately warm and knew, without knowing any of the details, how to be with us. They asked Nora's new name and used it on the second try. They asked what pronouns. They invited us over for dinner in the same tone they had always used. They were not perfect about it, but they tried, and trying was enough. A second group was confused, in a way that I would describe as genuinely innocent. They had questions. They asked some of them out loud in front of other people. They asked some of them in private. They did not mean to be unkind. They simply did not have the vocabulary. We answered what we could. We declined to answer what we could not. The third group fell away, slowly, the way some friendships fall away whenever any couple goes through any major change. I do not blame them. We were not the couple they knew. We were not the couple we had been. Some of their friendships were built on the shape of our old story, and the shape had changed. I will not lie to you about the loss. Losing friends during a season like this is one of the griefs that no one warns you about because no one thinks to mention it, because in a story like this one everyone is focused on the marriage and on the family and on the bigger questions about identity and love and the smaller questions about who you are going to call on a Tuesday afternoon when you need someone to laugh with you about nothing. Get lost in the noise. There were several Tuesdays in those years when I picked up my phone and looked through my contacts and put the phone back down again, because the people I would have called on a Tuesday in 2002 were not the people I could call on a Tuesday in 2011, and the people I could call in 2011 were not yet ready to be called on a Tuesday about nothing, because the nothing that I had to talk about was bigger than their nothing. The friendships I have now are, on the whole, deeper than the friendships I had then. They were harder to make. They were worth the work. We also very slowly made a new kind of family. Nora's mother became, in a way that I had not anticipated, the warmest member of our extended network. She sent Nora a birthday card every year, addressed to the new name, written in her careful old hand, signed the family. We have a cousin in Chicago who has been quietly supportive since the early days. We have a neighbor, 2 doors down, who brings casseroles in winter and does not comment on the names on the mailbox. We have a small, strange, growing group of people who know us by our actual names and who are not waiting for us to become our old selves again. That group is everything to us. It is not large. It is enough. I think a lot about the question of what it means to be a supportive spouse in this kind of story because the term supportive has been worn smooth by overuse. Being supportive is not about never being confused. Being supportive is not about being constantly affirmative. Being supportive is not about pretending that you are not also hurting. Being supportive is, mostly, about being honest about what you can and cannot do, and then doing what you can. For me, what I could do in the early years was hold the room. I could hold the room by staying in the house, even on the days I wanted to leave. I could hold the room by asking Nora what her week had been like, and actually listening to the answer. I could hold the room by being willing to be the one in the family who carried the awkwardness at Thanksgiving so that Nora did not have to carry it. I could hold the room by going to the appointments I did not feel like going to. I could hold the room by being the person who answered the phone when her mother called crying. I could hold the room by being the person who answered the phone when my own mother called angry. I could hold the room by being honest with Nora and with myself about the days when I could not hold the room, and by letting her know on those days that the room would still be there when I got back. What I could not do in those early years was fix it. I had been raised to believe that a good marriage was one in which the problems got fixed. I had to learn slowly that this is not a problem that gets fixed. It is a life that gets lived. The difference is enormous, and it took me a long time to see it. When you are trying to fix something, you're always evaluating whether things are getting better. When you are trying to live something, you are evaluating whether you are still willing to show up. Showing up is not a fix. Showing up is a much deeper and more ordinary act. It is the act of brushing your teeth next to a person who is also brushing their teeth. It is the act of buying the slightly more expensive apples because your spouse likes the crunchy ones. It is the act of taking out the trash on a Tuesday night because it is your turn. Showing up is what marriage is, when you strip marriage down to the bones. Showing up is what we did, and what we kept doing, and what we are still doing. There are moments, even now, 6 years into this life we are living, when I surprise myself with how comfortable I am. I was at a women's group at our local library last spring, and someone made a comment about their spouses, and I almost reflexively spoke in the old way, the old grammar, and then I almost reflexively corrected myself. The woman next to me, who did not know me very well, leaned over and asked, gently, whether I was one of those women whose spouse had transitioned. I said yes. She said very quietly that her brother had been one of those spouses in his case the other way around, and that she had not known how to be a sister to him then, and that she had been trying to learn, and that my being at the women's group being honest about my own life had been one of the things that had helped her keep trying. We sat there for the rest of the talk, and then we exchanged numbers at the end. That is how I make friends now. That is what it looks like when a community is built by people who are willing to be seen, even at the cost of a little discomfort. I also want to tell you about something that happened with Nora's work, because it is one of the things I am proudest of, and because it tells you something about the world that I think you should know. Nora's employer, a small electrical contracting company that she had worked at for nearly 15 years, did not handle her transition well. There were awkward meetings. There were HR forms. There were a few coworkers who were unkind in the way that small groups of people can be unkind when they feel that the rules have changed without their permission. Nora came home from a few of those days crying in the way that she had only cried in our worst early months. I sat at the kitchen table and listened, and I did not try to fix it. I tried, as we had learned to do in therapy, to be with her in the middle of it. After a month or two, the awkwardness eased. The unkind coworkers did not become warm. They simply became professional, which is its own kind of kindness, and which is sometimes all you can hope for from people who are never going to be friends. What changed at her work, and what I want to tell you about, is that Nora, after some months of being back at work as herself, was asked to mentor a young apprentice who had been having a hard time. The apprentice was a quiet kid, the kind of kid that the rest of the crew overlooked. Nora did not particularly want to mentor anyone. She was tired, and she had her own work to do. But she agreed. Over the next year, the apprentice began to talk to her in the slow, halting way that young people talk to older people when they have something they cannot yet say. The apprentice, who is now 23, came out to Nora recently as non-binary. Nora came home and told me about it with the look on her face that she gets when she is trying not to be too proud in front of me. I told her it was okay to be too proud in front of me. The apprentice is one of a long line of young people, I suspect, who is going to find a slightly easier time of it because Nora was willing to be visible at her job, in her ordinary electrician's clothes, with her new name and her new way of being in the world. I want to end this story, and I want to do it the way Nora and I have learned to end hard conversations in our house, which is with something true and small and tender. I love my wife. I love her in the new way, the way that was not the way I would have predicted at 22, and the way that I could not have learned without going through the years in between. We are not the couple we were. We are not the couple I imagined we would be. We are the couple that we actually are, which is a couple that has survived a season that almost any observer would have predicted would end us, and that has done so by refusing to mistake our marriage for a fairy tale, or for a tragedy, or for a test of how good a person one of us is. Our marriage is a verb. Our marriage is something we do, every day, with our hands and our voices and our patient, repeating selves. If there is a piece of wisdom that I would leave with you, and I want to be careful because I am not a wise woman, I am just a woman who has done some things, it would be this. The most important skill you can develop if you are in a story that looks even a little like mine, is the skill of staying in the room. Stay in the room when the conversation is hard. Stay in the room when the words are wrong. Stay in the room when you cannot yet find the right words. Stay in the room when the person on the other side of the room is not yet able to be the version of themselves that they will eventually be. Stay in the room when you yourself are not yet able to be the version of yourself that you will eventually be. The room is small. The room is ordinary. The room is the marriage, and the marriage is not a building. It is the act of being in the building. The act is everything. The building is just where the act happens. I would also, if I may, leave you with one practice that helped Nora and me more than I can measure, and that is the practice of thanking each other for the small things. Thank you for taking out the trash. Thank you for buying the apples. Thank you for not saying the thing that you wanted to say. Thank you for being willing to be seen, again with my sister on the phone. Thank you for being willing to be seen, again, with my father at Thanksgiving. Thank you for being willing to be seen, again, in this telling. The thank yous are not grand. They are not impressive. They are the kind of thank yous that you can say across a kitchen on a Wednesday, and that are more effective in the long life of a marriage than any of the big gestures that people write about in magazines. Big gestures are easy. Small thank yous, said often enough, are how two people keep their marriage alive. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.